All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. So, I don't think this gets talked about enough, but I think it is super, super, super important to uh, focus on lake selection. So, little backstory. I started out fishing off of docks and fishing ponds, like a lot of guys, and I fell in love with bass fishing. Um, it was seemingly overnight. It wasn't long. I think I went one, maybe 2 years of fishing docks before I ended up getting my first boat. I got an 8-foot Livingston. This is about 7 years ago or so. I got my first boat, and naturally, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. But yeah, I kept it simple. I got a boat and I went to the closest couple lakes in the area, fished them. Whichever lake I was catching more sizable fish, I stuck to those ones. And every year I got out a little earlier. I think the first year I got a boat, I was basically told that it's not even worth fishing until about April, that essentially these fish are impossible to catch. And that was sort of how it felt. I mean, any earlier than the second week of April, it seemed very tough and sometimes impossible. But persistence is key. I was such an addict very early on in my bass fishing career that I was determined. I got out early anyway, and I tried and tried and tried to catch fish earlier, and earlier. And basically, I found that if you choose the right lake, that you can catch fish pretty stinking early. I targeted largemouth because there was no smallmouth lakes that were smaller nearby my house. So I had to focus on largemouth, and I basically figured out the first week of March was go time. I didn't catch a ton, but I catch some monsters. Uh, I've caught plenty of fives, sixes, sevens, eights, even a couple nines doing this trick. And I didn't even understand how special that was back then. Now I'm fighting my ass off to catch those fish, and I have all the bells and whistles, a new bass boat, all that fun stuff. And I have found that I caught more big, giant fish with my small tackle bag, almost the size of a fanny pack, my 30-pound trolling motor, and my Livingston, than I basically do with my 20-foot bass boat with all the bells and whistles. It's funny to think about sometimes. And I still continue to do it for years. Unfortunately, I have a bad back problem, and lugging around my John boat and dropping it in these little lakes is not as easy as it used to be. I used to not have a problem. I used to do it 4 times a week. I'd get out all the time and just crush it. I caught big fish multiple times every week, all the way through spring into spawn. But shit, I continued even after that. I'm going to tell you my little tricks to make that happen. So, long story short, at least I tried to shorten it. So here we are on the maps. Generally speaking, you guys are probably from all over. If you're trying to select a lake to fish for the earliest days of spring, it's important to fish a lowland lake. When I say that, you don't want to pick a lake that's up in the hills, which it could be good. You just want to better your odds. So kind of get away from the foothills idea. If you're picking lakes, this lake compared to this lake might be completely different with water temps. This is getting runoff, cold runoff. You're going to get snow melt later into spring. These fish are just going to be about a couple weeks behind these fish that are inland more. Another factor is so you got runoff You got foothills, you got elevation. Elevation is key. The closer you are to the sea level, the warmer the water is going to be, just in general. I know that's not a blanket statement, but that's certainly true. Okay, and the next thing you want to focus on is picking a lake that's relatively shallow. I used to fish a couple lakes that were no more, one of them was no more than 20 feet, the other was no more than like 12 feet. And it was muddy, it was a shithole, and no one knew how special it was except for me, seemingly. And oftentimes I get the lake to myself. You go out in March, you get to experience the birds and the bees and the budding trees and the first sunny days of the year. It's a fun thing to do, especially once you get used to the colder temps. It's especially when you get a giant at the end of your line a couple times a week.
Shit.
You can fall in love with that really quick. And for those of you who are waiting until April or even May to get out and try to catch these fish, you are missing out. You are missing out, especially if your PB is only in like the 5, 6 pound range. You know, this is key. If you want to get some giants, this is the way to do it. Get out first week of March and just get out. You know, that's the starter. And when you encounter a hungry giant, you could throw a turd at it and it would maybe even pick it up. So keep that in mind. Your odds skyrocket when you get out earlier on getting into a PB, because March is go time. Just this month, I caught a 7 pound, 11 ounce largemouth, and you don't get many bites. I think I got 2 bites that day, and one of them was a complete giant. And that'll likely be the biggest fish of the year because I got out a little early. So, yes, so back to the lake selection. So, that is key, you know, wherever you're at. And the next most, actually, I would argue this is the most important thing. Pick a lake that's relatively close to your house. If you at least know that there's a few big fish in there, there are going to be a lot more than you think. So if you heard a guy catch a 7 pounder, you know, 3 years ago or 2 years ago, or a couple guys got a couple big fish out of there over the years, they're in there. They're 100% in there. So it pays to pick a lake that's closer, because what that means is you'll be able to get out there. You know, if your window is only 3 or 4 hours after work, you can even load up a boat, a kayak, um, and just get on the water and start picking it apart. And then when you spend time on these little lakes, like you find a gem close by, and you spend a couple springs breaking it down, you get to watch how these fish migrate, try different things to get them to bite. You could try different tricks and expand on that. And then if you stay serious in bass fishing, once you do have more tools, a bigger boat, what have you, you've learned a lot from even these smaller lakes, and you can apply it to these bigger lakes. Now, it sure didn't, not a ton of it translated to these bigger lakes, I'll be honest. But just the problem solving process of trying to get these big fish to bite can be applied on any lake. And you can't even get to that point until you kind of understand where these fish are and what you have to do to get them to bite. You got to think outside the box. You got to develop patience. There's a lot of things you learn even on these little lakes that will be applied to these bigger lakes as you expand, or other lakes. As you travel, you go on vacation, you try new lakes. You're doing the same process. You'll develop a process. For those of you, I should have mentioned this to some of you guys. I know a few of you guys are out there on kayaks on Lake Washington trying to break down that lake in February, March. your odds are much better if you get onto the right water. Focus on smaller water. You see guys on Fishbrain or Facebook catching these giants, but these guys likely have bass boats, electronics, good spots, years of experience, all that stuff. If you don't got all that, your best bet is to get on these little bodies of water for sure. So instead of, picking Taps, which Taps is not a bad lake to pick if you were going early, but, you want to hit, I don't even know if that might even be a seasonal lake, so that might not even be an option. But you'd much rather hit some of these other lakes in the outskirts, way better chance. And if you're living near the foothills, you may want to head, if you're on the foothills on the Cascades, you're going to want to travel west a little bit. Get away from those foothills and pick a lake or two and stick with those lakes. I ended up narrowing down my lakes to like 3 lakes that were literally, I lived in, I'm not even going to say because I don't want to give away the lakes. But I just literally picked a couple lakes that were the closest to me. I had one lake that was 6 minutes away. 6 minutes away from my house, and it was a sleeper. I was the only one out there in March, and I was catching, 6s, 7s, 8s, and just crushing it. And then I moved, and lo and behold, for the hell of it, I picked a lake that just nobody knew about. And still to this day, no one knows how big the fish are in it. And that lake was also about 6 minutes away. And I just started a new lake, and I started catching 6s and 7s out of it in the first week of March. So, guys, they're in almost every one of these lakes. There are some big ones, and those big ones are catchable. And the best time to try is early spring. And yeah, I've already gone through all this, so I'm just sharing this with you guys. You guys might eventually figure this out, but shoot, you're missing out. You're missing out every passing spring. All these little lakes. I'm not even going to go to specific lakes, but any lakes you see on here that have bass have giants. I lived in these areas, all of these, without going into details. Even up north. Up north, these are gems up here. There's giants in them. And I go on Fishbrain, which is funny because I go on Fishbrain sometimes to see what's recently been caught. I mean, shit, the state record came out of this little lake. Let that be a lesson in itself. Granite Falls. These are money spots. All these little lakes have them. So don't be afraid. Don't follow a crowd. Guys are catching big fish in these big lakes, so I'm going to drive 30 minutes and give it a try and it likely not work out. Pick a lake that's closer to you, break it down, keep it to yourself. Don't even post it. Shoot, keep it to yourself for years. And you could get some hogs out of there. Less pressure, the better. But yeah, all these spots. But yeah, these are all lowland lakes. All these lowland lakes, especially near the coast. If you're on the peninsula, even better. Down south, any of these lakes near Seattle, anywhere around Lake Washington. When you get into the east side of Lake Sammamish, you're getting a little closer to the foothills. The water's a little colder. But all these are money. Oh, and here's the next thing. So ride it out all the way to spawn. If you know much about bass fishing at all, you know that the bite kind of goes to shit post spawn. That's for basically every lake, any lake you go to. As soon as the fish spawn and do their thing, it kind of just goes dead for a little bit. You can still get one here and there, and I've done it for years before I figured out a couple tricks. So what happens is these lowland lakes, they spawn a little earlier. They're about 2 weeks, I would say 2 weeks ahead of schedule. So you get into them a little earlier because you're a week or two earlier, right when the water temps get to the right spot. These fish push up shallow. They're super finicky, hard to catch. Don't get me wrong, it ain't easy, but they're catchable. And then you ride it out. You got March, April, and you got a week maybe before those lakes, a week into May, before those lakes start to shift into spawn. You'll start seeing fish on beds, and that's well before some of these other lakes. These other lakes aren't even close to that. I'm telling you, 2 weeks, easy difference. And then once you hit that post spawn funk on those lowland lakes, then you reverse the thinking. Go hit those lakes that are getting that colder runoff, higher elevation, bigger water, deeper. Just in general, those lakes spawn later. So then you can ride out that pre-spawn for a couple weeks later than your lowland lakes. So you get that much more. So then you're into, we're talking June. And yeah, so June, I think that's when I caught my PB, was June. A fish was just full of eggs, and it was a 9.15 largemouth. And then by the time you switch back to the lowland lakes, you're almost past, you'll be almost past that post-spawn funk. That's what I call it anyway. So then you only have about a week or two of dead fishing. And then those lowland lakes will be in post-spawn, much further past spawn than the other lakes, and you get to enjoy more weeks out of the spring and summer that are better fishing, if that makes sense. So this is huge. And if you guys have been following me long enough, I'm sure there's a handful of you out there that might remember when I literally posted a spreadsheet of the timing of when each lake spawned and the pre-spawn, post-spawn, everything. And if you can visualize it on a spreadsheet, it makes you think about lake selection differently. And you can just time it way better. It turns kind of a big chunk of your spring into just a sliver of that post-spawn funk. You just got to jump around a little bit. And once you get a group of lakes, learned and understood through these times a year and do it for a couple of years, you can really get the hang of this and continuously catch big fish. So I hope this was useful to a lot of you guys. I know a lot of you guys, a lot of the guys that follow me, based on your questions, I can kind of gauge where you're at. This is probably very key. Even some guys that have been doing it for a while, maybe you just haven't thought about it this way. But it is super beneficial to break it down this way. I'm less picky now. I don't follow my own advice anymore. And I'm very stubborn. So I get out there when it's hard because I want to know. I'm so determined. I want to know how to catch them when it's the worst of the worst conditions. So I don't actually think that's a great way to approach it. I think the way I used to do it was a lot more fun, relaxing, rewarding. But yeah, now I'm just a little too determined. So I hope this helps y'all. And yeah, hopefully you guys give me some feedback. And I didn't get into how I catch these fish too much. I used to make videos about this when I first started making videos. But there's some neat little tricks and baits that work really well during these early weeks of largemouth bass fishing. So feel free to leave a comment. Happy to spill the beans. So good luck out there. Thanks for tuning in.